Okay, well, thank you for being patient, everyone. It's about 5 after 1, so I think we'll get started now. Thanks for joining us for our third Wisconsin AIS Partnership webinar. Hopefully, the first two were really useful for everyone on social media and volunteer management. This third one I think is really interesting. I've seen this presentation a handful of times. Well, I think as the short paragraph on the screen lets us know that sometimes just data itself doesn't cause people to change their behavior. I think here in the AIS world in Wisconsin, we're all about changing behavior. Inspect, remove, drain, never move, clean, drain, dry. Whatever we're trying to do to get people to change their behavior to prevent the spread of invasive species, we have loads of data that we like to share with people. To let them know why they should be changing their behavior and taking prevention steps, but sometimes that just doesn't always work. And with this presentation, we'll have some stories, not just data, on how people process information, what can stop them from acting on it, and what we can do with this knowledge to increase our stakeholder impacts. And then we'll have a short discussion after this. So just kind of, I guess, some housekeeping things before we get started. I'm going to mute everyone, and if during the presentations you have any questions that you'd either like me to keep track of or you'd really like answered right now, just send me a chat, use the chat function, let me know what the question is, and I'll be that guy and interrupt Elizabeth and try to get some clarification on your question. Otherwise, if we could hold off the questions, we'll try to hold off on questions until the end, and at that point in time we'll just open it up, we'll unmute everyone, and let a discussion go from there. So if there's no questions, we'll get started. We're really lucky to have two social science rock stars joining us today. We have Elizabath Rohring, she's the Director of Communications for the National Sea Grant Program, and she's also the coordinator for the Sea Grant Social Science Community of Practice and the Program Officer for the National Sea Grant Law Center. And she received her master's degree from Yale, has done, well, I've got like a long paragraph of cool work she's done. Some of it looks like it's been in the Caribbean, so I'm pretty jealous there. And in addition to all of her Sea Grant things she's doing right now, I guess if this is current, she's also working on her PhD at George Mason University in climate change outreach and engagement. So we're really lucky to have her to help walk us through the first 30 minutes of this webinar, and then Jane Harrison, and she's with us as well. She's the Wisconsin Sea Grant social scientist, and she's the first social scientist for Wisconsin Sea Grant, and she's out of Milwaukee. And she joined Wisconsin Sea Grant in 2012. She received her PhD from Oregon State University for her work in communities in the Pacific Northwest that have been forced to adapt over time to globalization and changes in supply and demand for the forest products upon which their economies have traditionally been based. So since then, she's done a lot of cool things here in Wisconsin that I know she'll be sharing with us. One of the things I really like is the Eat Wisconsin Fish campaign. I think that's really cool, and I think she'll talk about that for a little bit. So again, happy to have them, and I will pass the ball to Elizabeth, who will get us started. And if there's any questions or technical issues, again, be sure to hit me up in the chat function, and I will do what I can to fix those.
Excellent. So can everybody hear me? Anyone?
I can hear you, Elizabeth.
Okay, well, I'm going to bank on that means that other people can hear me too. So as Kim said, well, Tim, thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. As Tim said, I do work for the National Sea Grant Office right now. I have been a Sea Grant extension agent. I worked in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and I did a lot of work with fishermen and with the Department of Planning and Natural Resources there. And I've also worked at museum and aquaria. I worked at the Shed Aquarium for many years as their coordinator of public information. And then also I was the head of ocean science education at the Smithsonian for their new Sand Ocean Hall. So I spent a lot of time talking to the public about environmental issues. And one of the things that I just keep coming back to is, why don't people care about things? We provide them with this information, this great scientific information with evidence about how things that we are doing every day is impacting the health of our planet, and people didn't seem to care. And this led me to go to work on my PhD, which, yes, Tim, that is still current. I have a feeling it will stay working on her PhD for like another 10 years. But yes, I'm currently working on my PhD, and basically I want to find out, why don't people care about climate change? So that's going to be the example I'm using today. But as you guys probably know, a lot of these issues, these are science communication issues and risk communication issues. So we can say the same thing about overfishing or renewable energy or aquatic invasive species, which I will say I'm not a specialist in. I think that we have some people on the line who can probably add to this conversation when we have a discussion, and we can talk about what I'm sharing and see how it can be useful to you in aquatic invasive species work. So this is how it started with me, is particularly with climate change. The science is certain. I mean, 63% of people don't believe the science is certain. The public doesn't believe that this is really happening. The good news, and this is really recent data, this is March 2015, so this is the newest data from George Mason University Center for Climate Change Communication, where I'm working, plus our partner, the Yale Center for Climate Change Communication. So anyway, the good news of this graph that I'm showing you is today, in 2015, there are only 9% of the U.S. public who are very sure or extremely sure that climate change isn't happening. But as I say, 63% of people in the U.S. they aren't sure. They don't necessarily believe this is something that's happening, or that we're causing it, or that we need to act on. So the way I'm going to describe this is the models that we have been using to get information to people in the past, and then talk to you a little bit about the reasons I think that these aren't working, and what it causes when we try to just give people information, scientific information. And then I'm going to give you a few pointers, some tips, some of the things we've learned trying to get people to care about the environment, or overfishing, or climate change, or aquatic invasive species. So that's what we're going to go over today. So you may or may not have heard of the deficit model. That is what we've been using since about the 70s. What the deficit model said, there's a lot of public understanding and skepticism, particularly when it came to environmental issues. And academicians and scientists all got together and said, you know, it's probably because there's a lack of sufficient knowledge about the science. So they have this knowledge deficit. And if we could provide them this information to overcome the deficit, chances are the public's going to change their opinion and agree that the information on the science is reliable and accurate. And, you know, the next step that wasn't really explicit was, and they will act in the best way they can for society and the environment. So that's a deficit model. Give them information and they will act properly. However, it did not work. I mean, this is old school information transfer. We say people get this information, they'll act in the best interest of society, but as you know, that doesn't work. It hasn't worked. I mean, it works occasionally and it's great, but overall, this really has not, and there's a lot of academic articles now out about how we have to move away from the deficit model, the deficit model. But I want to understand why it doesn't work. I mean, we're rational beings, and we should be motivated to learn from information that was provided to us. It makes sense. But that is not how we process information. Aside from being rational creatures, we're also really emotional. And we tend to rely on our emotions or instincts to process information a lot more readily than we do from the rational part of our minds. So there's this great book, which is, I don't know, about 9,000 pages long, but really good if you have, you know, a weekend. It's called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And it's a good way to explain something that a lot of cognitive psychologists and social psychologists have been saying for a while, that we have two systems in our brain. We have a system 1 and a system 2. The system 1 is what we call fast thinking. It's like mental cruise control. You know, it happens automatically. Whereas the other system, system 2, is more slow thinking. It works a lot slower, obviously, but really what it is, it requires a lot more cognitive focus and cognitive effort. So thinking fast and slow. I wanted to give you guys a few examples of thinking fast and slow so that you can kind of understand what I'm talking about, because we all do it all the time, every day. All right, so we don't need a lot of explanation of what's going on in this slide. We look at it, we know that it's a woman, we can tell that she's blonde, and mostly what we know right away is that she is angry. I mean, we don't need to sit here and analyze this image to understand that she's angry. It happened right away. It was an instinctual response we had. That's fast thinking. That's something so we don't have to overly process everything we see. Okay, so the next one, I'm going to give you another example. Okay, so you recognize that this is a multiplication problem and that you could solve it. And probably some of you have already solved it. The answer is 408, by the way. But when you try to solve it, your muscles tense up and your pupils dilate and your heart rate increases. If you're doing something else, like if you're checking email while I'm doing this and all of a sudden you're focused on this, you have to stop what you're doing, stop what you're thinking about, and focus your cognitive effort on this. So that is thinking slow, and it requires a lot more mental effort than thinking fast. Okay, here's just another example. We look at this. Our two systems provide us a lot of information about the perceptions and reactions that we need every day in life. So we look at these lines, and we look at them, and they look like they are different lengths. However, when you measure them, obviously they are absolutely identical lengths. That's where our fast thinking and slow thinking kind of get messed up. We look at it and we say they're different lengths, but then our slow thinking stops us and says, wow, no, they really are the same length. And then a really interesting thing happened, even though we know, we just saw that these are all the same lengths. When I take those measure rules away, our system 1, our fast thinking, keeps trying to tell us that they're different lengths because automatically our brain just wants to see it and doesn't want to have any sort of processing going on to make us focus on why they're different lengths. And I think I have a...
So let's get back to this.
Yeah.
I think I was fascinating everybody with how our mind works, our fast versus slow. So.
Yes. Can you reshare your screen?
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Share screen. Share monitor 2. Good?
Looks good.
Okay. So those are different lengths, but even after we know they are the same length, our mind wants to look at them and still think they're different lengths. So I just want to give you a few more examples of thinking fast and what it is, and it has something to do with heuristics. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of heuristics. They're gut feelings about something. It's an intuition. It's just a way for us to take shortcuts when we try to process information. So for example, when I say the word island, my guess is that most of you think of something like this, you know, a beautiful tropical island. If you're redoing your kitchen and you're putting in a kitchen island, that may have been the first thing that came to your mind, but that also is a gut reaction to the word island. So another one is sunshine. When I say the word sunshine, you probably think of something like that, rays of sun shining through a meadow or a cloud or a forest. But what you probably didn't think of was the actual physics of sunshine, the physics of the energy from the sun. And the reason most people, now I will admit scientists are a little different, so I'm sure there's some of us in the audience who did think of this, but it's a lot easier for us to have an emotional rather than an analytical reaction to most of the things in our life. So in summary, thinking fast. It's our system 1, it's automatic, It really doesn't demand a lot of effort. It allows us to do the things we do every single day. It allows us to walk without thinking. It allows us to recognize a friend or drive a car. It helps us to quickly assess situations. So like, how are things going? Is there a threat or is that an opportunity? Is everything normal? But when System 1 gets put on alert, when we can't process something quickly, then System 2 kicks in. And System 2 is much more focused. It tells us things like, should I approach or avoid this? I need more information before I can make that decision. The thing is, it demands a lot of effort, and it requires control of your attention. But it does help us when things aren't as we expect. The good news is that there aren't a lot of situations like this anymore. You know, most of our lives we can go through with System 1, and it's really not that big of a deal. So System 1, thinking fast. One of the other things it does is it uses our intuition to build models of the world around us. That's why we can make these decisions quickly, recognize things quickly, do more than one thing at a time. And it likes to create coherent stories for us to follow. It's just, you know, our mind is building these models to help us through everyday life. But these stories or models are sometimes based on little evidence. It's not necessarily that we have all of the facts, but we take the information we think we need and we build a little story that is easy for us. And the more complex a topic is, though, the more we're going to look to reduce the complexity because we don't want to have to rely on System 2. So we want to make sure that whatever new data we get, that it's going to fit into a model that we already have so that we don't need to call in System 2. We're going to do everything we can to fit that square peg into the round hole because System 2 takes so much more energy and time. We don't want to use System 2 very often, so what we end up doing is rationalizing ways to fit conflicting data into our existing models. And that is because we are what are known as cognitive misers. I don't know how many of you guys feel this way. It may be me. I think I'm a huge cognitive miser. I will, you know, if something is really difficult for me and it's not something that I want to spend the time on, I'm absolutely going to figure out a way to fit it into my existing model. I am the queen of the brain sitting on a couch watching television. So the other thing that is a part of this is one of the things we love is we love a causal relationship. We want to know that B happened because of A. So we create these models of the events that surround us, and we use the models to predict and explain cause and effects. But we do it even when there isn't necessarily a real relationship because we're cognitive misers and we just want to rely on our fast thinking. Unfortunately, there is a dark side of this. It occurs when we draw conclusions that are based on incomplete models, and even when we have new conflicting data, even though the data could be correct, we try to fit it into our model rather than create a new one that's more accurate. So one of the things that happens because of this, and this may be something that you've heard of recently, is something called motivated reasoning. And I think this really is the key to why the deficit model doesn't work. And let me explain a little further. So motivated reasoning is when we get new information that challenges something, a deeply held belief that we have because we have these mental models, we're going to find a shortcut, a way to assimilate that information into our existing model rather than come up with a new model. So what we do is we arrive at conclusions we want to arrive at even when they're wrong. That's motivated reasoning. There are some specific types of motivated reasoning. I'm just going to share them with you a little bit because I think they come to play a lot in our type of work. One is called system justification. And basically what it is you want to protect the status quo of the system. It's, you know, a system that we've been working with for a long time, and, you know, we can't have been wrong for, you know, the past 200 years since we started democracy, so it can't be democracy's wrong. You come to a different conclusion. So it's a system that we care about, that we want to protect. There's another thing called cultural cognition. That's by a guy named Dan Kahan. Sort of confusing, but basically what it boils down to is a lot of our beliefs are, we use them to affirm our identity in a group. You know, my group feels this way about this topic, so I must feel this way about this topic. So you then take facts and you use motivated reasoning to turn them into something that supports your group identity. And then another thing with motivated reasoning is this is just the basic. We've had this since we were little kids. Nobody wants to be wrong. I mean, it's just when someone tells you you're wrong, it's not a good feeling. So motivated reasoning makes us really resistant to changing our beliefs, even when the facts say we should. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit how this fits into my work with climate change and using these topics, how thinking fast and slow and motivated reasoning really make the perfect storm for climate change and a lot of environmental issues. So climate change is a complex scientific issue. Our system 2 should be kicking in. We should be analyzing information about climate change, but we don't want to because it's too much work. So having a complex scientific issue is absolutely a way to ensure people don't pay attention to you. Another thing that happens, and again, this happens with a lot of things, is the media. The media today, they want to have balanced journalism, balanced presentation of topics. So depending on who you listen to, you know, you might listen to Fox and they say there's no scientific proof of climate change. You might go to CNN who say it's absolutely happening and, you know, we're doing a disservice by saying that it's not happening. You might go to places like I do for my news and, you know, get it from a different perspective. The other thing with this balanced journalism is that, you know, even though with climate change, we know that 97% of climate scientists believe that climate change is happening and that it's caused by people, but they want to show a balanced story in the media. So they want to find a scientist of that 3% who doesn't believe it. And so people who don't know a lot about the topic are going to be watching television and see one person saying, yes, it's real and we're doing it, and one other person saying, no, it's not real or we're not doing it. So they're getting an imbalanced view of what the scientific consensus is. Another thing that I could talk about for hours and hours and hours, but climate change, and again, a lot of recent science has been very politicized. And that's just something that is going to happen with science, unfortunately. And then finally, the consequences seem really distant. And that's something that we've learned, that we are more likely to discount things that are going to happen in the future and not worry about them rather than things that are going to happen right away. So we have issues we have to look at right now that are really important. Our schools are bad. You know, we need money to pay our bills, whatever. I'm not going to worry about what's going to happen in 50 years. So portraying these things as distant is doing a disservice to it. And then finally, there's a lot of imagery and heuristics that impact our belief, and I'm just going to give you a few more examples of that. So I look at this image, and to a lot of us who work in environmental science and environmental management, we see something like this, and it's a frightening image. It's, you know, tons of greenhouse gases billowing into our atmosphere, and, you know, the fact that it's in like Hades red probably doesn't help, but it's a frightening image. Whereas others, this is an image of industry, and industry is the basis of our economy, and it's a really important thing for our country. And without our economy, we're going to be lost. So people have to figure out in their mind which one is worse to them, having climate change in 200 years or destroying our economy by limiting industry today. That's a big argument, and that's what this image brings up to others. Another one is the complexity and uncertainty of climate change. We hear predictions about sea level rise that are all over the place. And then, you know, we think, oh my God, this could really happen. New York City could be swallowed by water. And then others look at that and say, that's a bunch of alarmist environmentalists who are just trying to light fires under us so that we can limit our freedoms. So images are really powerful. And then this final one, so when I ask people what they think of when they think of climate change, what image comes in their mind, I get two responses. One is polar bears. That, you know, was the poster child for climate change. The other one is our friend Al Gore. In research, he is one of the most frequent images that come to mind in surveys of climate change imagery, which is great because, you know, he's done so much to make this a public issue. However, there are lots of people who don't like him and think he's just trying to get his name in the media and, pull a big hoax on the world about global warming. So, and one of the things I like to point out about this is this image I got off of Google Images, and the name of this image is Al Gore, the Face of Satan. So obviously there's a little bit of complexity in people's feelings about Al Gore, but he again is really associated image with climate change. So I want to go back a little bit to motivated reasoning. So the IPCC came out with an assessment recently about climate change, and this is from the physical basis of climate change. There were 259 authors, 39 countries involved, and they had to literally address nearly 55,000 comments. So this had a lot of people looking at it. Right after it came out, Yale University asked a bunch of climate scientists to give their take on what the findings were. This is from a woman at Rutgers, and she basically says that it reaffirms the message, but with more certainty, more urgency, more clarity, and more specificity. The bottom line is that the Earth is warming and changing, and humans are causing it. So that same week, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal called "Dialing Back the Alarm on Climate Change." What they found is that if there's an increase of 1.2 degrees Celsius over the next 70 years, it would extend the range of farming further north, improve crop yields, increase waterfall, enhance forest growth, and cut winter deaths. So yay, go climate change. They also say that carbon dioxide levels are going to help the Earth become greener because plants grow faster and need less water when carbon dioxide concentrations are higher. And then they summed it up by saying even with 2 degrees of warming, the benefits are going to outweigh the harmful effects, and 1 to 3 feet of sea level rise during this period is not much. So right there, we have 2 completely different perspectives taken from one scientific report. And that is motivated reasoning in action. Even we, the people who believe climate change is happening, who took the IPCC report seriously, we probably did some motivated reasoning too. I will absolutely tell you I did not read every page of that report. So, we want to take shortcuts. We want to find the information that supports what we believe, and that's what the Wall Street Journal did here. And this is just one of my favorite motivated reasonings and climate change images that, I don't know if you remember a couple years ago, there was a ship doing research in Antarctica on climate change, and that the scientists had to admit defeat because there was too much ice and they had to be rescued by a helicopter. And that was, for a lot of people who don't believe in climate change, they said, that's it, see, climate change isn't really happening because in Antarctica there was ice. Anyway, so yeah, motivated reasoning. And just kind of in summary, these are the types of things that people think that stop them from really taking our information, our good, sound, scientific information, and assimilating it and making it fit into new models that make more sense. They need to learn how to adjust what they believe. So that's why the deficit model doesn't work. But that said, there's absolutely still a place for providing sound scientific information. We just need to figure out how to make them listen first. We need to be aware of these things that they're going to be doing when their beliefs are challenged. So one of the things I want to do just with the few minutes I have left is give you a little primer on tools for risk communication, because that's what we're all doing. We're talking about risks and uncertainty. And so these are some things that we have found to be useful. First one is something called framing. Framing's kind of gotten a bad rap because I think some people use framing to use a different message that has a different meaning to different people. That's not what we're talking about. What I'm talking about are taking a concept that's difficult for people to understand and tying it to another concept, a related concept, to make a connection so that they understand and it's better explained, this issue we're talking about. So for example, with climate change, we say that it's caused by increases in greenhouse gases, and some of those are types of pollutants. That is scientifically accurate, but it doesn't really say anything. It doesn't help me understand why I need to care about it. But if we were to say climate change is caused by increases in greenhouse gases, which have been shown to increase health problems in the elderly, the sick, and young children, then that is going to make a difference to people. People understand public health threats, and there probably know people who have public health threats. And I can say this with more confidence now because a group of physicians just came out with a report on climate change, and they actually say that, yes, a lot of these respiratory issues suffering that the elderly, the sick, and kids are suffering from are increasing due to climate change. So just to give you another example of this, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, absolutely brilliant guys, won Nobel Prize in Economics based on this type of work. This is from something called The Framing of Decisions and the Psychology of Choice. So they came up with this scenario. There's a terrible virus that's spreading across the world, and it's expected to kill 600 people. So 2 alternative programs have been proposed to combat it, and the following are the consequences of these programs. Program A, if it is adopted, 200 people will be saved. Program B, if it's adopted, there's a 1/3 probability that 600 people will be saved and a 2/3 probability that no one will be saved. So which one should you do? Which program should be adopted? Well, when they did this test, the absolute majority of people chose Program A. Program A should be adopted because we know 200 people will be saved, whereas if we choose Program B, well, there's only a 1/3 probability that 600 people will be saved and a 2/3 probability that no people will be saved. Well, what you guys have probably figured out is those are the exact same numbers. It's just how the information was presented. The majority chose Program A because it is more risk averse. And because you're showing it in a better light, you're talking about number of people who will be saved rather than people who won't be saved. So gain frames, we call that a gain frame. Gain frames are more impactful than loss frames. People want to hear how they can make things better rather than what's going to happen that things get worse. So here's one. If we don't address the causes of climate change, health problems for the elderly, the sick, and the very young will continue to get worse. That's very much of a loss frame. If we restate it, I mean, it's the same information, but we say if we reduce the causes of climate change, we can provide a healthier future for the elderly, the sick, and the very young. So that is a gain frame. I'm sure you could shoot holes in these. I just came up with these for the moment, but my point is people want to see how they can make things better rather than what will happen if they don't act and things will get worse. So that's something to think about. And then finally, the framing needs to be based on existing schema. People have to, they have these mental models. You can't try to convince them of something really new and use information that doesn't make sense to them. So I always use the example of a pomelo. Pomelo, if we describe it, it's the largest citrus fruit. It's got a rind that's thick, soft, and easy to peel. The fruit's like pink to coral pink, and it can be juicy or dry or spicy, sweet to tangy tart. That's a very precise definition, but it doesn't really hit any of my mental models. So if you were to say instead, a pomelo is basically a supersized grapefruit with a very thick and soft rind, people are going to get that. So when you frame things, you need to make sure that you're not trying to frame 2 things that they don't understand. You need to give them something that they're going to grasp, that they can pull into their mental models. And the last thing I just want to share is there's been a lot of talk about using fear in terms of framing. I mean, this has been done for a while. I don't know the age of the people on the phone, but there was this ad campaign. It's like they showed an egg and they said, this is your brain, and then they cracked it into a hot pan and said, this is your brain on drugs, and it was very frightening. If you did drugs, you were frying your brain. And it was a pretty effective thing. Well, we haven't been that effective when it comes to environmental issues and scaring people. What the thought is we need to scare people into action. And it's tough to do it right because there has to be a balance between the threat that we're telling them and the response to threat. Otherwise, they're going to freak out and not do anything. So the first thing they need to know is, am I susceptible to the threat? And if they are, is the threat going to be severe? And if they decide that, yeah, those 2 things are there, then they're going to say, am I able to respond to the threat? Can I do anything about it? And if I can, is the response going to work? So if you're going to be trying to scare people into action. You got to keep it balanced. And I'll just give you one final example of how we didn't do that so well in climate change. We talk a big game about how if we keep climate change going, if we don't do anything to address it, you know, ocean currents are going to change, jet streams are going to change, New York City is going to be underwater and then under ice, and it's all very terrible, but there's something you can do about it. You can change all the light bulbs in your house to CFLs. So that's not a really balanced message, and I think that you know, we've worked harder. We're trying to work more local and see what you and your community can do to make your community more resilient to climate change. So the other thing is really we have to make sure our messages are simple and clear. We need to make sure that people understand what we're saying, because we know a lot and it's hard to give that information to other people without sounding like scientists. This is an example of something from a newspaper article that was supposed to help people understand how coral was going to be impacted by climate change. This is a group, the population, I would say about 50% of the people had a high school education. So it would have been a little bit better if you could say it in a clearer way, a simple, clear message. Coral is like a tiny upside-down jellyfish that has an even tinier plant living inside of it, something that they're going to be able to relate to. And then your source. This is really important. When you're talking to people, you need to know your audience and you need to know who they trust. You know, is this a homeowners association that's relatively conservative? Is this a bunch of environmentalists? You need to know who to bring in to talk to them, or at least how to talk to them, because you don't want the face of Satan walking in and talking to a bunch of people who don't think that he's trustworthy. So I will leave you with this. This is the mantra. This is what I use every time I work on trying to get a message to people. I want a simple, clear message that's repeated often by a variety of trusted sources. So that's it. I apologize for any of the technical difficulties, and I'm happy to answer questions. There's my email and my phone number. Feel free to call me too. So now I think we're going to turn it over to Jane. And let me see if I can do that. Let's see.
If not, I can do that pretty easily.
Okay. Am I turning it over to Jane or am I turning it over to you?
I'm turning it over to Jane right now.
Okay, perfect.
Providing she still has, or she has her presentation. If not, I have it. Hey, Jane?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Can you see the presentation?
No. Can you?
Services Center helped our network develop and deliver more.
Do you?
North Coastal Services Center is a resource for all Louis.
What do you see, Tim?
Nothing. So.
Nothing. Oh, I got it. Maybe I have to.
There should be a tab. Share at the top, like file, edit, share, maybe?
Share my screen, yes. Monitor 1 or 2, okay. All right, I think it's working.
Success.
Okay, so you see my PowerPoint, Tim?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I see it.
I have 2 monitors, so you're either seeing rock climbing pictures or this. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad you could make the webinar today. I'm not going to talk very long. I just want to let you know about a few resources that you have. You know, I think the presentation that Elizabeth just gave, it really just kind of gets you thinking about what might... Ooh, I don't know why that's doing that. It's just moving on its own right now. The PowerPoint has a life of its own, I guess. Anyway, I think Elizabeth kind of gets us thinking, and then, you know, you might have some questions for your own programs. And if you're looking for resources, I would suggest connecting with the Sea Grant Great Lakes Social Science Network. So this network...
Coastal Services Center is a resource for all...
Let's see here. Sorry, there's a recording that's involved with this PowerPoint. a friend of mine put it together, but hopefully it'll stop doing that. Anyway, social science. So this group, we're part of the Sea Grant Network in the Great Lakes. So in the Great Lakes, there's 7 or 8 different Great Lakes programs, and almost all of them have a social scientist. We try to work together. A lot of folks work on AIS issues, so we might connect with our AIS leaders in that area, like Tim. And I'm sure you guys kind of already understand what social science is. It's describing, explaining, predicting human behavior in interaction with our environment. And so there's a lot of different disciplines that get into social science. And these are just some of them. So, you might have a colleague who is a sociologist or an economist, but maybe what you really need is someone in the communication sciences, someone like Elizabeth, who does risk communication or science communication. Perhaps you need a social psychologist. And so I just put this slide up there to kind of help you remember that, I'm guessing many of you come from a natural science background, and you recognize there's many, many different kinds of natural science fields, just like there are many kinds of social science fields. So I think sometimes if you have a social science question, you kind of have to go to the right discipline to find the answer, and that's something that the Sea Grant Social Science Network can help you with. Okay, so trainings. The network, we offer a variety of trainings on different social science methods, theories, things that you can really use. So generally these are geared towards Sea Grant employees throughout the Great Lakes, but we also sometimes open them up to other groups. So if this is something you're interested in, I'm sure we can make something available, especially if we already have, created the presentation. We might even have it archived. But if you want to know how to write effective survey questions, if you want to learn more about community-based social marketing, how to run a focus group, looking at economic impacts, perhaps, of ecosystem change. Those are the kinds of trainings that we offer and can be very useful, perhaps in your own work. And then we also do some research. So the research that our group does, and again, these are in all the states around the Great Lakes, we work on applied problems. So it could be an AIS issue. If there's, a question that you guys are all wrestling with, that's something that you could come to our network with, and we could try to, perhaps collect some data, try to better understand your target audience, maybe that 10% that still hasn't gotten the message, that's something that we could work on with you. And so I'm going to talk just about really one research project that I've been involved with. And again, this is applied research with an outreach focus, and it's the Eat Wisconsin's Fish program. I've done a lot of other work. Weather Ready Nation, that was really looking at how weather messaging impacts decisions made by broadcast meteorologists, so your TV weather guy. What kind of information prompts him or her to say certain things on the air, how weather information impacts emergency managers or the emergency management community. So when does the school official decide to close down their school? And then other projects I've worked on are more economics focused. So I've done a lot of work on the economic impacts of beach closures on Lake Michigan. And also inland beaches. So trying to understand people's decision-making when they visit a beach. How does algae, growth affect them? How does, the fact that it's closed or open affect them? There's a lot of people who don't mind swimming in a closed beach. Even with a sign that says, hey, these are, high E. coli counts, this is dangerous to your health, there's still a lot of people out there at the beach. If it's a sunny day, you know, if they have the day off work, if their friends are there. And so some of my work on beach decision-making and economic impacts of beach closures is really trying to get at what are all those different variables that, you know, influence someone to go to the beach, to not go to the beach, and how do water quality, you know, conditions impact their decision-making. So like I said, I'll just focus a little bit on one particular project, and that's the Eat Wisconsin Fish program. And this is something that initially when we were getting into it, the idea was we want more people to, you know, be aware of local fish products in Wisconsin. So both wild-caught Great Lakes fish as well as farm-raised fish in Wisconsin. And, you know, there are a lot of different kind of images, you know, when you think about that fast versus slow thinking about local fish. You know, a lot of people do have negative thoughts about Great Lakes fish. They're thinking about mercury. They're not sure if that water is clean. When it comes to farm-raised fish, often people's first images, at least if they have a negative connotation, it's often they're thinking about some kind of, you know, like a CAFO situation for fishing, like, you know, these confined animal feeding areas. But, you know, for fish, you know, they think about unhappy fish when they think of fish farming. So, you know, what Elizabeth was saying about framing things in a positive way, you know, what do you gain by understanding about the fish? You know, that's really where we tried to go with these outreach materials. And we didn't just develop, what you're seeing right here is some pictures, just some of the images we use on our brochures. This is a fish counter in Madison at the co-op. So we put these little cards on the fish. Any Wisconsin fish gets a little card that says Eat Wisconsin Fish. So we're trying to be very consistent with our branding, with the fork and the lemon and the fish, you know, very simple. You know, some of the facts and the messaging that we use, again, very simple, and it was developed from focus groups. It was developed from surveys of grocery store consumers. So some of the words that we were using initially in our brochures were things like safe, so safe, sustainable, healthy. Now, healthy we found to be a good one. We've kept that. But I don't know if anyone can imagine, you know, when you see the word safe out there, safe fish, safe seafood, that doesn't really motivate people to want to eat the fish. It actually makes them think about, oh, should I be wondering if it's safe? And then the word sustainable. It just means so many different things to so many different people. And certainly when you think about making a fish decision, about buying a fish, you know, a domestic fish versus a fish from Asia versus a fish from the Great Lakes, there are so many different elements to sustainability. So we really went away from that word as well. So, you know, with this kind of outreach program, you know, we have a lot of information on our website. We have a eatwisconsinfish.org website, and that's where we put more details. We have details about how often you should eat the fish. When I do presentations, you know, I give that kind of information, but a lot of times when we are handing out brochures, we're giving out magnets, freebies, you know, we really try to keep the message just super clear and succinct. So, you know, I think that's what you guys have been doing in the AIS world, and it seems to be very effective. And so I think this is just another example of kind of trying to stay, you know, succinct and use the words and the messaging that resonates with people. So in Wisconsin, there is a big local food movement, and a lot of people like to eat local. And it's not just one side of the aisle, you know. I mean, maybe in some places that's the case, but there is a very strong tradition of, you know, eating, you know, food from the farm, from your area in Wisconsin. And so we've found the word local and trying to eat, you know, from the Great Lakes, from Wisconsin, to be a very effective way of talking about, you know, Wisconsin fish and really growing awareness about what options are out there. With that, I'm going to just turn it over to questions. If you want to get in touch with me, my email is there. You can also contact Katie McCoy. She's the one who often decides what trainings to do for the Sea Grant Social Science Network. So if there's something the AIS group would like, she can help facilitate that. Thank you so much, Tim.
Thanks, Jane. And it's about 2 o'clock, so I want to give people the opportunity to take off if they'd like, but otherwise I'd just like to open it up to any questions, any general questions quickly. I can unmute everyone and give everyone, should make it a little bit easier to chime in with questions.
Hey, this is Elizabeth. I just want to point out that there's, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So there's somebody who's on the call, Doug Jensen. I assume this is Doug Jensen from Minnesota Sea Grants.
No, there's no beavers in that.
And
Mike, what's that?
he's done work in aquatic invasive species in the kind of stuff that I just presented on. So it would be great if, you know, even if we were to do some webinar, whether the social science webinar or another one for the EIS partnership, to hear what Doug has done, because he actually does it with aquatic invasive species. So.
I have no idea.
Hi, Elizabeth. This is Doug speaking.
Hey, Doug.
Thank you for the plug.
Sure.
Yes, we have applied some heuristics in terms of aquatic invasive species and related to the Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers campaign. And one of the things we've done is tried to use some strategic communication to see if we could get the same kind of response through our communications as we might through the typical direct extension model, and that is based on one-on-one contact, you know, doing presentations and having booths at different events and using mass media and now also social media. But we found it to be very effective and very comparable. And it's following those two models that Elizabeth just spoke about, the fast track versus the slow track.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. We may have to invite you back sometime.
That was the primer.
Yeah. Well, Elizabeth, I kind of have a little bit of a question. It seems like, at least for me in my AIS world, I noticed with the climate change communication, especially with that New York Times article that was kind of dialing back the concern about climate change and started talking about all the beneficial impacts.
Yep.
When I see that in the AIS world, I see that talking to fishermen all the time. If you've ever been to Lake Erie and walleye fished or fished for smallmouth bass, they're huge. AIS are doing great for it. Or in some cases, if you're a shoreline property owner, you might actually like zebra mussels because of impacts to water clarity.
Yep.
And so it seems like kind of the way around that would just would be maybe the best way to try to reframe the issue somehow into something else that they may experience.
Questions so far.
Yeah. In fact, what I found, because I was trying to see if there were communication articles about invasive species to you know, see if there was some practical academic information, you know, any research that's been done on it. I found one article. It's by a guy named Saul Hart, who is actually big in communication. He does a lot of work in climate change communication and a lot of work in framing. This is talking about framing it as a driver of change versus a passenger of you know, like it. Anyway, I can't explain it, but I will send you a link to it, and maybe you could share it with others. I don't think it's the answer, but I think it'll give some insight into how people understand cause and effects with invasive species, and it might help. So I'm happy to share that. But
Okay.
yeah, we have that issue with climate change. We have that issue with all kinds of things. You know, an economic frame usually trumps an environmental frame. So, you know, you need to know who you're talking to and what's important to them, and see what you can do to change the conversation to something that's going to impact them.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Last call for any questions.
Hi, can I ask one?
Yeah, go for it.
When you were, this is for Elizabeth, when I was listening to you explain the difference between fast and slow thinking, I was trying to think of an example where I've had to go from transition from slow to fast thinking and the process that it entails. And one of the examples I could think of was learning bird song. At the first, it was like really hard to learn them, and now it's like it's just reflexive. I hear it, and it's just like I pick up the phone and a family member's on the other end of the phone. I recognize the voice right away. And I'm just wondering, can you really shortcut that transition from slow to fast thinking with just using simple, clear statements?
So part of that, the part that's important for what you're just asking about is the repeated often. So just like you said with bird calls, and an example we use all the time is learning to drive. You know, when you first learn to drive, you have to give it all of your attention. You know, God, I hated when I had to merge lanes. I mean, I had to turn the radio off. And so it is something that with practice or with hearing it over and over and over again, it can become fast thinking. It's just something that you have assimilated into your model. So that's why we don't just say simple, clear messages from trusted sources. They need to be repeated often. And again, I'm going to call out Doug, because Doug, I think that's one of the things you did in your work is you repeated your messages, the same messages over to these same people. So it just became sort of routine to them.
Well, and how often do they have to hear it before it becomes their routine?
Yeah, I haven't seen any research on that one yet, so I can't really tell you. But I think that's one of the reasons why consistent messaging is important. You know, if everybody in the state is saying the same thing, that's great. That's why we always have so much trouble when somebody says, hey, what you're saying isn't right, I think this, because they're going to take the information that you're using and they're going to say something different about it, and that's where people get confused. But you know, if everybody working for DNR, an aquatic invasive species, says this is what it is and this is why it's important to you, and we're going to have your neighbor who's been impacted by this tell you that exact thing, that's the kind of repetition they need to hear. So that's a long-winded way of saying I don't really have a definitive answer for you. I have never seen any research on that.
Yes, I'd just like to follow up on that. This is Doug. I recently had a discussion with Doug McKenzie-Moore, the community-based social marketing guru, and the topic of repeated messaging and 7 messages before people are able to cognitively understand and also remember a message. And he said simply that is not true. It's urban legend.
So it's not just 7 times and then we're done?
Correct. It can be influential in just with one exposure.
Right.
But it depends upon what the message is and whether or not the person that's being exposed to that message is motivated by that message, and it elevates their motivation to change their behavior or change their perspective on a certain situation.
Well, thanks. That was a great question, Mike. Anyone else?
Elizabeth, I have a question for you. This is Doug again. So,
hey, Doug.
In terms of framing and your work in climate change, what can we learn from your work with climate change and framing the issue on aquatic invasive species in particular?
Well, so what we did, and it took a lot of time for us to figure this out, is that people have really responded well to 2 frames, to a health frame. You know, nobody wants what they're doing to make grandma next door sick or, you know, your neighbor's children. You don't want to be that person. So that has been a good frame that has gotten some positive response. The other thing, as I said, this issue is, you know, the big hairy issue that, you know, well, if China and India don't sign on, then what's the point? Well, we don't want people to think in those terms. We're also framing it as a local issue. You know, do what is good for your family and your community. So that people have responded well to that. I'm actually in the middle of some research. We're testing a science frame versus a health frame versus a local frame, and we're just writing up the results now. So, you know, and we found that the health and local frames were much more impactful, that people felt motivated to act when I heard those. Whereas with the science frame, unfortunately, they just dozed off and disagreed. It made them want to fight. So
what I think I hear you saying is that, you know, the climate change issue may not be something that is as tangible to people. They may not be able to see it, whether it's perceived or real, but in comparison maybe to aquatic invasive species, those impacts, which also can be perceived or real, may be more real than perceived.
Yes. Well, and I also think that you guys have a great list of things that everybody can do. You know, clean your boat off. Don't throw your bait into the water. These are things that, you know, when I was talking about the fear, you know, people have the ability to do it and it's going to be effective. So, you know, I think that that's going to be very useful for aquatic invasive species. You are taking care of your community rather than worried about, you know, I wouldn't know what to say about Asian carp. I really wouldn't, you know. That would take some time to figure out how do you get people to respond to that, because that is a big thing and a big threat, and we don't necessarily have a response that is efficacious for that. So I guess my response is local, like make it as local as possible, make it easy for people to want to do it. Make it something that they can do, and they're doing it because they're taking care of their community, because people have a lot of pride in their sense of place. It's something we're talking about in social science right now. So that, without any real academic journals to back it up, that would be my recommendation based on what we have learned from climate change.
Thank you.
Sure.
I've got one more question.
Okay.
I was heard Tom Haberlein's talk about his work on navigating environmental attitudes, and I think his conclusion was it's sometimes easier to change behaviors than attitudes. And do you find this to be true? And if so, how does that guide your messaging?
So I think that's a great question. One of the things that we do a lot is we look at, we segment our audience to see who believes what when it comes to climate change. And Yale and George Mason have the 6 Americas of climate change, and you know, each has a different degree of belief or disbelief about what's happening with the climate. And so we know that first of all, there's some people who are never going to change, and you know, gratefully, it's only about 5% of the American public, but so that's just not something we can do. But what we can do is we can bring out, my brother used to be what we would call a dismissive. My brother used to think that climate change was a hoax. It was just a liberal thing. We're just trying to stop people from making money and give all, you know, whatever. I couldn't even tell you his arguments, but he just didn't believe it. Well, he and I kept talking and talking and talking, and what he finally came to believe is, you know what? There's nothing bad with reducing air pollution. There's nothing bad with not relying on foreign oil. So what we've done with climate change is we've found just simple things that people can do to change their behavior without having to say climate change is real and we're causing it. You know, what we're asking people to do is going to make the planet a better place. We're not going to say if you want to change all your light bulbs, you also have to believe that we need to, you know, limit coal. We're just going to say these are some steps that you can take to make your community better for your kids and their future. So I do believe that you can change behavior without changing belief, but you're going to have to frame it in a way that will resonate with them. And it's not an easy thing to find out. But, you know, work with some social scientists, work with people in your community, find out what is important to them, and get huge grants to do it, right? Does that help?
Yeah, thanks.
Hi, can you hear me? This is Eric.
Yes.
Hi, this is Eric Eichenberry. I work in fisheries. One thing that no one really addressed was the active opposition or the propaganda that would occur and does occur with almost all of these issues. For example, I know somebody who had some mercury in fish work, and the opposition has these shadow groups that have these nice titles like Restaurants for Better Food for America or something like this, trying to discredit the work. And rather than, it wasn't a scientific paper saying, oh, either there's not as much mercury or the mercury is not as much of a health risk because of this data. It was just discrediting the researcher, saying, oh, it's all funded by grants and they just do the work to get grants. Or it's very shadowy and very much in opposition. And
right.
It's hard to challenge that stuff with more data because the data isn't really being addressed. They're not addressing data.
Right. And I think that is something, climate change, we are still going through that, although not as much. There were all kinds of campaigns. Basically what led to scientists still don't agree. This is still a complex issue with lots of uncertainty. And that's when the climate change people went and did all these campaigns about 97% of climate scientists believe, why don't you? And unfortunately, I think they did not handle it well, and I shouldn't say this publicly because my advisor was part of it, but basically our response was, how can you be so stupid? So I think that is something you need to be wary of. I think one of the best things to do is to get the right information out to people. To, if you have to address somebody who is, in this shadow campaign, who is basically saying that your information is wrong, it's your job to show how it is right in a way that is going to matter to the people. If they have valid points, that's a whole other issue. In fact, I'm going to see if I can find it, because I was looking at a paper about some plant in Hawaii, invasive guava plant, and that was the exact issue. These guys had done all sorts of research, but there was still some uncertainty about the biocontrol that they were going to use. And this other group just came out and said, you don't know that it's not going to kill all of the island's guavas. You don't know this. You don't know that. And he took that information from their scientific literature, from their environmental assessment. So, what that requires is getting the right information out. And we use terms that the public doesn't quite get. When we say uncertainty, we can say 3% uncertainty, and people go, oh, it's uncertain. We have to be able to explain to people. So that's where public meetings come in, getting people on the radio, that sort of thing.
This 97% scientists agree kind of bothers me a little bit because, most scientists used to believe the Earth was flat at one time, or McDonald's hamburgers are the most sold in the world, therefore they're the best.
Right.
It can lead to false logic.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that was a battle we shouldn't have been in. Absolutely not. But we did. So we learned lessons from it. I don't think trying to prove the other people are stupid or wrong is the thing to do. I think talking to your stakeholders, the people who matter, in ways that they understand and that matter to them. And again, I say that like that's super easy to do, and I know it's not. But, sit down with a group of them, find out what's important to them, find out what's stopping them from thinking things, that are correct. I think you can't do anything wrong by just listening to them and trying to address, and if you can address a small group of people's issues, chances are they're thinking what other people are thinking. So, yes, I do not believe in a "you're so stupid" campaign. I absolutely, and uncertainty. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to thank you, and that's one of the reasons why I was so interested in this seminar. And your points about, there's nothing bad about reducing air pollution or using energy more efficiently, even though shadow groups will try to hammer that message. Oh, we don't need to save energy. We don't need to. Pollution's not that bad.
Right.
That kind of counter messaging, but
yeah.
Anyway, thank you.
Sure, and if I can find that article again on the Hawaiian invasive guava species, I will send that to Tim, and maybe he can share it with the group. So
great, thanks.
Yeah.
Tim.
Yeah, I'd be happy to pass that along.
Okay.
Great.
Well, I'm going to end things here. This webinar, it's been great. It's also renewed my faith in the uncomfortable silences, waiting for people to comment and questions. I was like, oh, we're done. No, we're not. But thanks everyone for pitching in. Thank you again, Elizabeth and Jane, for joining us today. It's been great. I'm going to follow up here hopefully later today with just a short survey about your experience. It'd be great if you could fill that out, and then hopefully I'm going to do a better job about posting the recording so that way you can share it with anyone else that you know that might be interested. So at that, thank you, and if you're participating in the Landing Blitz this weekend, have fun, go stop some aquatic hitchhikers, and we'll talk soon. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Tim.
Bye-bye.